Good morning, everybody. Barry Jones, SP History, and this is chapter 46, I believe, 45, 46. And we are continuing on with our discussion of the Secret Service. This series has attempted to answer to date four questions. And the first question was there any prior indication the Secret Service had that JFK's life was in danger? I took you through several plots just in the month of November alone, sufficient to demonstrate, I believe, that the Secret Service should have been on heightened alert in Dallas instead of in in the throes of literally an institutional breakdown. Uh, I think the Secret Service is fully aware of that. They knew it at the time. They still know it to this day, which is why they continue to refuse to turn over documents, which could compare previous motorcades and the security protocols versus the motorcade in Dallas. They knew it was different, it was unique. They knew that anyone with half a brain would see that quickly and clearly. If those documents were released, they just refused to release them. The second question was, if you're going to corrupt the Secret Service, participate in a plot of this magnitude, do you have to corrupt the entire agency? And the answer is no. A few rogue operators at the top is all it takes. And I think we established a number at four. I gave you four names. The third question is, were there enough security breakdowns to cross the threshold into security stripping? In other words, does it cross over from being accidental or incidental or the result of incompetence, the result of inexperience, to being the perfect planning of a conspiracy? There's a big difference between security breakdowns and security stripping. One is literally a breakdown, it's in the moment and it's unintentional. The other is very intentional. Hopefully, I answered that question sufficiently to show that I believe, when taken together, it shows a pattern of security stripping. The fourth question, which we answered yesterday, was there any evidence that the Secret Service tried to suppress after the fact? And I took you through another long list of items that were suppressed or people that were disposed of, loose ends, or crime scene that was contaminated, or bodies that were stolen, or I go on and on and on. So the Secret Service, and of course, all the way up to and including all the investigations, Warren Commission, House Select Committee, refusing to turn over documents, et cetera, et cetera. So I think so far we've answered four questions, and they all point in the direction of Secret Service complicity. Today, I want to talk about the Edward Snowden of the Secret Service in 1964. Of course, if you're all familiar with Edward Snowden, he's the guy that's persona non grata in the United States today because he, uh, as a contractor with the NSA, had access to a lot of documents that showed that the American government was lying to the American people and about all kinds of things, about surveillance, about foreign policy, et cetera, et cetera. And he smuggled them out. See, these documents out, got him to WikiLeaks, and next thing you know, everyone's reading them. And he was able to expose from the inside the duplicity, the uh, well, let's leave it at that, duplicity of the American government, that our elected leaders were lying to us, that our government has been turned against us, weaponized against us. He was the first to sort of, the tip of the spear to reveal that to the American people. Of course, he got branded a traitor and all the things. He had to go to Russia to prevent himself from being arrested for treason, tried in a war crimes court. No, I'm sorry, a military tribunal, in which case you have very few rights, and he would have no doubt been convicted and maybe even executed. So he is essentially a whistleblower. He's sort of, if you want to compare, go back to the 70s, and the White House was upset with Daniel Ellsberg for releasing parts of the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times. Uh, this Edward Snowden is sort of the modern version of Daniel Ellsberg, and they both fall in line with the tradition of Abraham Bolden, who predated both of them. Now, Bolden, and it's interesting, bad things happen to both of them, right? And when you throw Abraham Bolden into the mix, bad things happen to all three of them. This is a picture of Abraham Bolden with JFK. He's the black guy on the left. He's a Secret Service agent, and he's out of Chicago, and we'll tell his story today. I think the question that we're going to seek to answer today is, was there anybody, or was there information from the inside that implicated the Secret Service? We've been looking at a lot of witnesses from the outside, a lot of events circumstantially from the outside. We've been looking, for example, yesterday we talked about Chuck Robertson, how there was a friend of Penn Jones and Gary Shaw, and they had revealed to this friend had revealed to them the Chuck Robertson story. That sort of got the ball rolling. That Jim Garrison got a letter in the mail during the trial of Clay Shaw in the late 60s about Chuck Robertson. There was a notation in the Warren Commission about a Secret Service agent saying that something came over the teletype saying a Secret Service agent was killed that day. There was the nurse who heard it at Parkland Hospital. There was the delivery driver who confirmed it. There was the newsman that was in the hallway, overheard the conversation. You see what I'm saying? These are all periphery witnesses, and everyone's sort of hearing the same story. So when you start putting the puzzle pieces together, it looks like it was Chuck Robertson, who was the Secret Service agent who went down to Harwood, Maine, tried to confront the motorcade to prevent Dealey Plaza from happening, which was about 6 blocks away. So, and then he disappears. So it just looks like another case of the Secret Service disposing of a loose end. But that's the result of putting puzzle pieces together from multiple witnesses on the outside. Today, we're going to talk about somebody from the inside. And the question is his information credible? Is there credible information from inside that implicates the Secret Service? Here is another picture up there of Edward Snowden. And you can see, I don't know if that's his passport up there, what that is, ID. He's had to flee America. There's a good movie out. Oliver Stone, of course, did the movie about Edward Snowden. I encourage you to check it out. It tells a pretty convincing story about Snowden and his efforts to try to, that's what these whistleblowers, they know they're bringing hell down on themselves and their families when they do these things. So it becomes a matter of principle to them, and their life is turned upside down and never does return to normal. My guess is Edward Snowden will die someday, years later, hopefully, but and still be considered a traitor by a good chunk of American society. This is the bottom picture, news articles, collection of news articles about Abraham Bolden. And you can kind of get the gist of what's fixing to happen in his life just by reading the headlines, that story of that character. Right. So this is what many people refer to as the Jackie Robinson of the Secret Service, which, of course, if you know anything about Jackie Robinson, he's the first black baseball player in the major leagues. So this guy, according to White House Press Secretary Pierre Salinger, he labeled him the Jackie Robinson of the Secret Service. And he was the first, and he was a first of many things. He wasn't just the first Secret Service agent. He was the first African American Pinkerton. I remember the old Pinkertons back during the it was a detective agency. He's very exclusive, very elite detective agency. My memory of the Pinkertons is mainly back during the era when the deep state was forming, the rise of the corporations, when they didn't want labor unions to take root in their workforce. They used the Pinkertons to keep the labor unions out, to keep their workers in line. They were basically thugs, what they were back then. He served on the Illinois State Highway Patrol. That's his home state, Illinois. And in 1960, he joined the Secret Service. So, the year in question is 1963. So he's only been in the Secret Service 3 years. And his job, in line with what the Secret Service original mandate was when it was created, was to bust up counterfeit rings. That was his role in 1960. He becomes the first African American to serve on the Secret Service White House detail. That's the Jackie Robinson part. And it happened by chance. JFK was in Chicago giving a speech, and when he left the building, the Secret Service routed him through the basement, where the Secret Service had Abraham Bolden guarding a basement bathroom. So you can make of that what you want, but they had him out of sight down in the basement guarding a bathroom. It just so happens that becomes the route for JFK as he's exiting the building. JFK noticed him, stops, talks to him, and on the spot invites him to DC to be on his White House detail. And that, while it was a big break for him, was simultaneously a thorn in his side because he got special attention from the President of the United States. And he's African American. You're going to find out quick as we go through this. The Secret Service was one of the last bastions of segregation. Most of these agents were from the South. That was their experience growing up. And here is this African American who's only been on the force of the agent with the agency 3 years, getting this jump, this huge promotion from guarding a basement bathroom in Chicago to now being and serving on the White House Secret Service detail at the request of President Kennedy. They started looking immediately for ways to hang him. And they got him in trouble on one occasion because Kennedy, who's not aware of all the rules and procedures and protocols of the Secret Service, invited him into the Oval Office. This poor guy, Abraham Bolden, Kennedy keeps getting him in trouble. All right. He was flying under the radar down there guarding a bathroom. Now all of a sudden he's on the Secret Service detail. He's got everybody's attention. They're not happy about it. Now they're looking for things to hang him on. And he gets invited into the Oval Office on one occasion by Kennedy. And Kennedy's showing him around. I mean, this is Kennedy being his magnanimous self, right? The only problem is for Abraham Bolden to accept the invite and go into the Oval Office, he had to temporarily leave his post. So he got in big trouble for that. It was just constant. He was under a microscope. I mentioned the Secret Service agents in 1960 were largely Southern, and they were almost all white. They were all white except for Abraham Bolden. There was a culture. They were hard drinkers. Now I've already told the story of them out all night at the press club in Dallas on the 21st, bleeding into the 22nd, and then transitioning from the press club when it closed to the cellar. That was not out of the ordinary. These were good old boys, for lack of a better way to describe them. According to Abraham Bolden, who constantly complained about this is one of the things that Bolden found himself in Dutch for. He kept going to his superiors registering complaints. Today that would be you going to HR, or if you're a cop, you'd be going to internal affairs, whatever. And you keep complaining because the agents you're working with are using the N-word. On one occasion, Bolden got home, and they say it was a joke, but the Secret Service agents had left a noose hanging in Bolden's house. And so Bolden is in what we would call today a, quote, hostile work environment, no question. And what he noticed pretty quickly was that these good old boy Southerners hated JFK, and they weren't quiet about it. Like the Joint Chiefs, when we were talking about the Pentagon, I told you what Curtis LeMay said about Kennedy. I mean, it's just what Lemnitzer said about Kennedy, what Burke said about Kennedy. These are all admirals and generals in the Joint Chiefs, and they were very outspoken about their hatred, their distrust, their dislike, their disrespect for JFK and how he would, in their view, contaminated the Oval Office. Well, the Secret Service was similar. And for all the reasons that we've discussed, he was a Northeastern liberal, which ran, at least culturally, counter to what these Southern boys' experience was. Though he was a Democrat, he wasn't one of them. He was crusading all the time for civil rights, which they felt was the reason Abraham Bolden was in the Secret Service, uh, the White House detail to begin with. He was the token, right? Today we'd say he was a DEI hire, right? Uh, they didn't like him because of all the agencies out there that knew Kennedy. The Secret Service knew him the best because of proximity and access. They knew about his liaisons with all these women, and they knew about his drug use. They knew about all these things. And meanwhile, he's posing to the American people as this family man, and they thought he was a moral degenerate. And biggest thing was that he was a national security liability. They bought into that. And the so that escapade I told you the story about in Dallas where they went out all night and left the firemen to guard Kennedy while they drank and partied, did drugs, hung out with prostitutes. This was happening all the time. According to Abraham Bolden in Hyannisport, where the Kennedy compound was, he would go there on weekends and such. Secret Service agents regularly left their posts and went into town, and they would bring back booze and women, and they'd have a big time. And this was all winked and nodded at by the superiors. It was the culture. And then Abraham Bolden joins the force, and you can kind of see both sides of this. Obviously, Abraham Bolden uh, has a personal axe to grind because he's being called the N word, and people are leaving his coworkers are leaving nooses at his house. They're treating him like crap. They're always trying to get him in trouble. So he's complaining. He's going to the head of personnel, whoever that would be, and he's complaining. He's registered. These are documented complaints. So pretty soon it got around that they had a malcontent. That's how they call it. Characterized that he was a squeaky wheel. You got to watch him. He's a rat. He'll rat you out, kind of thing. And he left a documented trail. It's another reason why the Secret Service didn't want to turn over any documents, because Abraham Bolden left a documented trail of complaints, of things that he was reporting that would have got anybody else fired. You know. Anyway, he came to this reputation. Today we would call him a whistleblower, but one person's whistleblower is another person's troublemaker, right? So while he's the one reporting the racism, reporting the drinking and the escapades to his Secret Service superiors, within the ranks that's not going to go over well. Even the bosses weren't happy. Here comes Abraham again. What's he complaining about now? And of course, the rank and file couldn't stand him because he was the tattletale. So after only a month and a half in D.C., courtesy of JFK's invitation, he gets sent back to Chicago. This is his punishment. And in a month and a half, they accumulated enough data on him to justify punishing him or demoting him back to Chicago. On October 30, 1963, the Chicago Secret Service field office received an FBI teletype. This is a picture of Bolden inside his Chicago office. It was taken in June 61. So this is before the basement bathroom meeting with Kennedy. Anyway, on October 30, 1963, the Chicago Secret Service field office received this FBI teletype, and it was a warning of an assassination plot. And you remember, this is from that anonymous FBI informant named Lee, whom I believe was Lee Harvey Oswald, calling Chicago, warning them there was a hit team of 4 anti-Castro Cubans coming to Chicago to assassinate JFK in Chicago. I told you that story, how there was a motorcade scheduled. The motorcade route took him to the city, just like in Dallas, by these tall buildings. And he was in Chicago, or he was going to be in Chicago for a football game. These I don't know, I don't think it was Army Navy, but it was like Navy Air Force. It was 2 armed services academies playing at Soldiers Field. At the same time that this tip came from Lee, a Chicago landlady simultaneously reported to the Secret Service that she found high-powered rifles and ammunition on the beds of a rooming house where she worked, and she had rented this room to these 4 Cubans. And when she went up to clean, all this paraphernalia was laying out on the bed. She also found a map that she turned over, and there was an X marked in front of a building located right on a 90-degree turn. Stop me if you've heard that before, in the motorcade route. And it looked like the location where the operation was going to commence, right? That's where the shots are going to happen, right in front of that building, right on that turn. And this is a map of the motorcade, so it's obviously referring to the president. It's found on the same bed with all these high-powered rifles and ammunition, and it's in the possession of these 4 Cubans she had rented the room to. So she turns it all over. So it's the combination of these 2 tips that forces the Secret Service into action. Um, Meanwhile, there was a guy running around in Chicago named Thomas Arthur Valley making loud threats against the president. And turns out that he was an employee in that warehouse marked by the X on the map they found in these 4 Cubans' bedroom. And he had been very vocal in his intentions to, he was threatening the president, is what he was doing. They had him under surveillance. Turns out that we now know what this was. He was the Chicago patsy. And this was going to be used against him after the event, whereby the 4 Cubans took out the president. They were going to blame it on Valley and use as evidence as motive his hatred for the president, all his public statements, and the fact that he had a background. It's very similar to Lee Harvey Oswald. He was an ex-Marine, means he was trained as a sharpshooter. He served at a U-2 base. He served in Japan, just like Lee Harvey Oswald. He trained anti-Castro fighters. This guy was Lee Harvey Oswald North. He was the Chicago version. They're the same. He even has 3 names, right? Anyway, he was a loner in the sense they all get characterized that way. Uh, the Secret Service searched, they arrested him. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. They're surveilling him at the time, and they had searched his apartment, and they knew that he had a rifle and ammunition. He had a handgun. They found 750 rounds of ammunition in his car when they searched his car, but they didn't arrest him because the plot is still on at this point. They're just surveilling him, keeping tabs on. He's literally he's violating all kinds of laws, and for some reason they are not arresting him. I mean, just making a threat against the president is sufficient to be arrested, right? This light in here is on a timer, or actually it's got a motion sensor, so I can tell if I've been sitting here too long and I haven't moved. They go out. So every now and then the lights will go out and I got to wave my arms around or something. So anyway, they haven't arrested him. They've surveilled him, and they've got plenty of cause to arrest him, right? He's making threats against the president. That's illegal. He's got all these weapons in his apartment, in his car, ammunition, plenty of cause to arrest this guy. But as far as they know, the plot is still on, so they're not arrested. They're just keeping tabs on him. And uh, as you know, just using your deductive reasoning skills. You can't arrest the patsy before the shooting. He ceases to be, have the opportunity to be the patsy. So you have to arrest him after the shooting. As long as the White House was still planning to come up to Chicago, Valley ran around Chicago as a free man. But as soon as the White House got wind of what was fixing to happen in Chicago, they canceled the trip. Now, I have mentioned earlier why the White House was so sensitive to anything like this out of Chicago. You know the history. Chicago is dominated by the outfit, which at that time was headed by Antonio Cardo, but the guy who really was the day-to-day operational head of the outfit was Sam Giancana. And if you recall the story, prior to the 60 election, Sam Giancana and Joe Kennedy, who used to work together during Prohibition, running rum and whiskey across the Canadian border. That's how Joe Kennedy made all his money, all right, working with the mob. So he goes back to his Chicago context. It looks to him like, it looks to everybody, that this election 60 is going to come down to the state of Illinois. If it comes down to the state of Illinois, it means it's coming down to the city of Chicago. And so he goes to his contact in Chicago, Sam Giancana, and they make a deal. If you'll help my son become president and wring out all the votes we need in Chicago to win Illinois, when my son becomes president, he'll have a friend in the White House. He'll shut down all the investigations into organized crime, and he'll get you back into Cuba by overthrowing Castro. Cuba was the rich man's playground, right? It was Las Vegas before Las Vegas. And the mob was losing all kinds of money, not being able to operate in Cuba. So it sounded like a good deal. So next thing you know, Sam Giancana recruits into the plot all the other heads of the families. And it becomes a nationwide effort to get JFK elected from these underworld figures. Carlos Marcello's in on it, Santos Trafficante, the heads of the five families in New York, Sam Giancana in Chicago. And voila, wouldn't you know it, he wins the election. And Illinois turns out to be the deciding state, which means Chicago's the deciding city. And he wouldn't be president. He owed his presidency to the contribution of Sam Giancana and the outfit, and the others as well. Well, he becomes president. He immediately, which means Sam Giancana has done his job. Now it's time for JFK and Bobby to do their job, to fulfill their end of the bargain, but they don't. JFK turns Bobby loose. Bobby starts rounding up all these organized crime figures, prosecuting them, bringing them in front of hearings, just turning FBI sort of, gangster or racketeering squads loose in Chicago, constant round the clock surveillance, harassment, et cetera, et cetera. And so it looked like they'd been double crossed. Then, instead of fulfilling their promise to get Castro gone and them back into Cuba, in their view, he's the reason Bay of Pigs failed. And you fast forward to 62, and he had another opportunity, kind of a do-over at the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he doesn't invade, he doesn't bomb the missile sites, he doesn't get rid of Castro. And now the rumor is he's making nice with Castro, trying to recognize Castro and his government. So they got nothing. They got literally nothing. They got him in the White House, and then JFK double-crossed him. So the White House hears of any kind of plot in Chicago. They know the backstory. They know the history, like I just told you. So they are very sensitive to any plot coming out of Chicago, because they know who runs Chicago. And they know that if Sam Giancana wants to, and he comes to Chicago, he puts himself at risk by coming to his city. He very well could end up, there are some people in this world you can double cross, and there's some that you can't. The mob, you can't. And JFK has to know this. Bobby has to know this. So the White House is very sensitive to what could happen in Chicago, because they know, I mean, if you're going to look at it in terms of street justice, they deserve it. They double crossed the mob. So when they hear of this plot, they immediately cancel the trip. And it's based on these credible tips, and he knows the backstory, or they know the backstory. So now they arrest Thomas Arthur Valley. Here's the booking photo. The cancellation, in fact, happened so late that city officials had to go around with trucks. They put loudspeakers on the trucks to inform the crowds were already assembling. So it must have been on the day of. White House just waited, that JFK was not coming. It was a shock to the system in Chicago. They'd been looking forward to. This is one of the reasons why when we get to the 18th and Tampa and Miami, or Miami specifically, the plot was not shut down or announced to the Secret Service or announced to the White House because they didn't want the White House to cancel the trip. They learned through Chicago if the White House finds out about these things, they might cancel the trip. So you got to keep them covered up. You can't let the wrong people find out. So anyway, they cancel the trip. Now the FBI, or actually the Secret Service, arrests Thomas Arthur Valley. Meanwhile, the Secret Service had staked out the rooming house, wanting to catch the four Cubans. In their stakeout, they got sloppy and exposed themselves. Two of the Cubans fled, so they never saw them again. The other two they caught. And Bolden, Abraham Bolden, was present in the interrogation of these two Cuban arrestees. David Morales, who was nicknamed El Indio, pictured on the left, and James Braden, who was nicknamed Bradley. These are, you should recognize these names because 20 days later, these guys are in the Dow Tex building down in Dallas. We know that because Braden got arrested hanging around the lobby of the Dow Tech building after the shooting. So they arrest these two, but because there's been no plot, nothing got carried out, there was no reason to really hold them. So you have these Cubans, two of this four-man team, pretty sure that's what they were, an assassination team. Two of them are in the wind. They disappeared. The other two, the Secret Service ends up releasing them. They had alibis or whatever, so they end up releasing them and destroying all the records. They weren't technically arrested, but they destroyed all the records. We would never know about this story and who it was that were arrested. It'd be interesting to know who the other two were. I bet they ended up in Chicago or Dallas too. Anyway, we at least know who two of them were, and the only reason we know is because Abraham Bolden was there. And as I mentioned, on November 22, 1963, 20 days later, witnesses placed both Morales and Braden in Dallas. In fact, Morales himself confessed to it later. Braden was arrested, as I mentioned. He said that he was in Dallas on business. He was inside trying to make a phone call. Again, because he had a cover story, the authorities released him. Subsequent investigations revealed that Morales was a CIA assassin and Braden was a spotter. Morales said so himself. He was a self-described CIA assassin. So that's why I believe in the Dow Tech building, Morales was the shooter and Braden was the spotter. These two guys teamed up more than once. In fact, interestingly, if you want to spin it forward to 68, Braden was in LA on the same night RFK was assassinated. In fact, he was interviewed by LA police and he had a cover story to get him off the hook there as well. So everywhere you go that there's a plot against the president, this guy Braden, which means Morales, they were there. They were in Chicago on the 2nd. They were in Dallas on the 22nd. They were in LA when RFK got assassinated in 68. And, what other purpose would Morales be in these places where assassinations were either attempted, plotted, or carried out other than to participate in? That's what he was. He was a CIA assassin. Meanwhile, Thomas Arthur Valley, the guy who's supposed to take the fall for this whole thing, is released an hour and a half after his arrest. He gets fined $5 and a hunting knife on his car seat. And they found the least incriminating charge they could slap on him to justify the arrest, but to release him with a slap on the wrist. And then he just disappears. And an author, Edwin Black, who wrote the book Chicago Plot, wanted to interview him or find out what happened to him. Obviously, he's a big part of this story. And he finally found him, in the 70s, living out in Arizona. I think it was Phoenix. He was in a witness protection program where he lived until 1988. And of course, the question was, what on earth was Thomas Arthur Valley doing in the witness protection program? He never testified against anybody. He was never a witness against anybody or for any purpose. And this is just another example of the Secret Service making someone disappear who would be a loose end. Now, they had different means, right? We've seen it already with Thomas Shipman. He would have been a loose end. He had foreknowledge of the Dallas plot. He wasn't going to go along with it. He had to be eliminated, right? Um, then you speed it forward to Chuck Robertson. He had foreknowledge, according to witnesses. He went down, tried to stop it, and he had to be dealt with. They disappeared him. Now, here's another witness that could get that. But I would suspect that Thomas Arthur Valley, like Lee Harvey Oswald, probably knew what he needed to know. And in other words, his role in the plot, which he didn't have to shoot anybody. He just had to run around and make it sound like he hated Kennedy and carry a bunch of weapons with him. He was going to be set up. And he doesn't know all the different aspects of the plot. So there's not, I don't know, it's not sufficient knowledge to at least to have him killed afterwards. And or maybe they trusted him to keep his mouth shut, paid him off, whatever. But they disappeared him. He was like off the grid in the witness protection program. New name, new papers, you know, everything was new. And the only reason he was found because this author just doggedly pursued. He eventually had enough sources to track him down. But this is what happens to these guys in the secret that are affiliated with this plot. The Secret Service gets their hands on them, and if they can't be trusted, they get disappeared, they get dead. Thomas Arthur Valley was sort of lucky; he ends up in the witness protection program, but he has no cause. There's no other reason. That was one of the things Edwin Black researched was to find out. Okay, was there another case that Thomas Arthur Valley was involved in that necessitated him being placed in witness protection? And there wasn't anything. It was all because of this Chicago plot. He was sequestered away. Anyway, Abraham Bolden is the one who, from the inside, is telling the story after the fact about Braden and Morales being arrested, about the tips, about the plot to kill the president, about the evidence that was found in the rooming house, about this guy Valley and what he was arrested for, what he was suspected of, and he didn't draw any conclusions. He just told the story and how afterwards he was released. Now we also know, because of information that came out from other sources, that right after the assassination, turn of the new year, January 64, the Secret Service had recalled every agent's ID badge and issued new credentials. And that was because of the escapade the night before where they lost their badges and their guns in the cellar bathroom. We know that. And the reason we know that is because Abraham Bolden put those pieces together for us. When the question, it's not like the Secret Service is going to publicly release that information. Someone inside explained when Abraham Bolden talked about all the other escapades. He says, well, the one in Dallas took the cake. We had to actually get new credentials because 10 of the agents lost their credentials and their guns down in Dallas. So we found that out from Abraham Bolden. After the assassination, remember, within the Secret Service, Bolden has a bad reputation. They think he's a troublemaker. Today we would call him a whistleblower, and he might have some protections as such. But within the Secret Service, they didn't trust him. And in May 17, 1964, he had been reassigned to a 30-day stint at the White House. Now, this is with the new president, a Southern good old boy president, LBJ. And Bolden does what Bolden always did in those cases. He had information he wanted to share. This is during the heyday of the Warren Commission. And so he calls Lee Rankin while he's in D.C., calls Lee Rankin, the lead counsel of the Warren Commission, and he says, I want to testify to the Warren Commission about the Secret Service and its role in the JFK assassination. Uh-oh. I mean, it's one thing when you're telling a story about, you know, racist Secret Service agents. When you're telling the story of these wild escapades, drinking and prostitutes and drugs and leaving their posts and all this kind of stuff. Uh, but in his capacity, and I think it was twofold. First of all, he's in the Secret Service itself. He has experience in the White House details, so he knows the protocols, and he's from Chicago. So there's a Chicago element to this. Well, now he's called Lee Rankin and he's offered to testify to the Secret Service. Word gets back to his boss at the Secret Service. They send him an emergency summons back to Chicago. And they tell him it's under the pretext of, hey, we've got this African American counterfeit ring running wild in Chicago. We need you to infiltrate it. Only you can because you're black. So they under this pretext, they send a plane to pick him up. So 4 days after he offers Lee Rankin testimony about the Secret Service's role in the assassination, he's back in Chicago, and when he gets off the plane, they immediately arrest him. And they indict him for bribery. Turns out he's accused of giving Chicago mobsters, two of them, Spagnoli and Jones, Joseph Spagnoli and Frank Jones. They accuse him of giving them their criminal file in exchange for money. They're trying to defend themselves in court. They want the file. But as we're going to discover, the reality of this was Bolden got himself in trouble when he offered Lee Rankin testimony about the Secret Service's role in the assassination of JFK. He became a threat to the Secret Service. So this is how they deal with threats. Now he's got too much light on him now to do to him like they did to Thomas Shipman and Chuck Robertson. So they're setting him up a different way to get rid of him. In the trials, these two mobsters were brought to testify against Bolden by the Secret Service. The first trial results in a hung jury, which means the jury can't make up its mind. The judge orders a second trial 2 weeks later. And the second trial results in a conviction. Despite Spagnoli and Jones both admitting to the judge they'd perjured themselves. This is not an open court where the jury can hear, but back in the judge's chambers, they both admitted to the judge that their testimony was a lie, that they committed perjury. And of course, the whole case hinged on their testimony. He's accused of giving them their criminal files. So the Secret Service puts them on the stand. The prosecution puts them on the stand to testify that, yes, indeed, he had given them their criminal files. And then in the second trial, it comes out they committed perjury. It doesn't come out in the press. It doesn't come out publicly. It doesn't come out for the jury. It just comes out before the judge. Well, Spagnoli claimed that the lead prosecutor, Richard Sykes, I thought that was an interesting name, Richard Sykes. If you've ever seen the movie The Fugitive, Richard Sykes is the doctor. They call it. They name him Richard Sykes, the doctor who allegedly killed his wife. Remember that? They chase him around. Tommy Lee Jones chased him around. Harrison Ford played the role of Richard Sykes, and it's set in Chicago. So the lead prosecutor in Chicago during this time was Richard Sykes. So I'm sure that's not a coincidence. Anyway, according to Spagnoli, Sykes forced him to lie, no doubt using it leverage, like, hey, listen, if you don't lie for me on this case, I've got you on all these different charges in different cases. I can make those go away if you do me this favor. If you don't, I'm going to get you on all these other things. So he literally suborned the perjury of Spagnoli. Suborn means you force somebody to lie under oath. So Spagnuolo saying, it wasn't my idea. It was the prosecutor's idea. And then when the judge confronted Sykes, instead of denying it, he pleads the Fifth Amendment, which, you only plead the Fifth Amendment when you're afraid you might incriminate yourself. So at that moment, the case should have been dismissed, thrown out by the judge. But no, the judge upholds the conviction. Jury never hears all this evidence about his perjury, his suborned perjury. The judge sentences Bolden to 6 years of solitary confinement. They put him in a straitjacket, take him to Missouri. There's a mental institution they take him to. This is the same mental institution, by the way, that Edwin Walker from Dallas was taken to. You remember Edwin Walker was the general that JFK fired for proselytizing his troops with politics and stuff. He was a hero down in the South. And he anti-civil rights, anti-communist, and there was a lot of speculation he might run in '64 against JFK in the primaries for president. And he's the guy that went to Ole Miss, got everybody stirred up when the Ole Miss was forbidding James Meredith from enrolling. Turns into a big brouhaha down there. Bobby Kennedy arrests Edwin Walker for insurrection, and they send him out to the same mental facility in Missouri. And so this was like a location that had been used before. It's been used anyway. Abraham Bolden is in a straitjacket, taken out. His trial got rigged, so he ends up sentenced to 6 years solitary confinement in this mental institution. They force fed him all these meds, trying to break his brain so that he would be completely discredited. And if he tried to say anything in the future, he has this stigma of being a mental patient, a convict, a mental patient. His brain is broken. Same thing they did to Jack Ruby, right? Jolly West did to Jack Ruby. This was a ploy commonly used to permanently discredit a witness. You break their brain with these medications and stuff. He's officially fired by the Secret Service. Somehow he kept his sanity. Now he always said that it was because he found religion. He said the Bible saved my life, and he becomes this very religious person. He didn't have anybody to talk to. His only source of comfort in there is the Bible. So he just reads and reads and reads the Bible, and he claims that it was what allowed him to survive mentally and physically, serving this very, very hard time. Wrote a book about it. In 1967, so this is 64 when all this happens to him. So in 67, he's been in there for 3 years now, half of his sentence. Jim Garrison is investigating the JFK assassination down in New Orleans in preparation for the Clay Shaw trial, and he uncovers this Bolden story. So he and his private attorney friend, assistant, Mark Lane is a hero in all the JFK research community for all of the work he did so early on in this. A lot of what people know today is built on the foundation that Mark Lane discovered back in the 60s. And so Garrison and Mark Lane, they go out and they hold this joint press conference. And they tell the story, just like I am today, of Abraham Bolden to the American people. American people didn't know anything about this guy. And the only thing they know about him is based on news articles in Chicago that paint him out to be a crooked cop. Well, Garrison and Mark Lane are telling the other side of the story. And there's an outcry, and the public pressure forced the government to release Bolden on probation 2.5 years early because they got shamed into it. News comes out about the crooked judge, about the crooked prosecutor, about the lies under oath, about how the trial was rigged, about how he's been treated in this mental institution. There's nothing wrong with it. Government abuse, right? And it wasn't sufficient to torment Abraham Bolden. They were also going after his wife. While he's in prison, he can't protect her. While he's in prison, Bolden's home had been firebombed. She had been shot at. Her car had been blown up. And on another occasion, his garage caught on fire, and it turned out to be arson. This is a picture of his wife, Dorothy, a very strong woman, no doubt. Anyway, he gets out of prison. He got whether or not he was wrongly convicted or not. Well, of course, we all know he was, but you still got that stink of it on you, right? So, but he ends up getting a job at a Department of Defense factory, and he becomes a union official. He comes out a different person, no doubt. Even if he hadn't found religion and done all that Bible reading, he would come out a different person. Maybe he'd have been bitter. Maybe he would have been vengeful, but you're going to be different. You can't go through that kind of experience and not be different. But he came out a better man. He found religion. He came out a different person and a better person. He gets this job, a good job, at the Department of Defense factory, becomes a union official. So that means his coworkers who used to hate him, Secret Service, now they're voting him in as a union official. And he begins a public campaign. This is right in the height of the Vietnam War, to raise money for Vietnam soldiers. He calls it Smokes for GIs. And he starts basically a charity to raise money to buy cigarettes for Vietnam soldiers. It's not enough for Bolden to be free. He wants to clear his name completely. So he hires an attorney. Now, he doesn't have the money to pay for this attorney, but he has a skill. Turns out he was a classically trained pianist with a degree in musical composition and concert pianist. This guy was like a Rembrandt, like a what do they call those? Uh, oh my goodness, I forget the term for it. He was a cultured, educated individual, um, a Renaissance man. That's the term I'm looking for. He was a Renaissance man. So he would go around Chicago and play these piano recitals and raise money to pay for his legal defense. Here you see a picture of him when he's younger playing the trumpet. And in the bottom picture there, they called him the music man. Um, I'll just read this little caption here. Music man, Chicago's Abraham Bolden, suspended Secret Service. See, it's still following him around. Accused of offering federal evidence to accuse counterfeit. The first two things they say about him are bad. Outlines for Reverend Wallace Sykes, the first of a piano recital series featuring all Bolden compositions to raise money for his own legal defense. So this is what happens to you, and this is why it's such an effective strategy against a witness. Rig up something, uh, frame somebody criminally, and then introduce into the scenario some sort of mental problem. Put him in a prison, get him convicted, put him in a prison, and drug him to treat him. And when he gets out, he can say anything he wants. No one's going to pay him any mind. And even if it's discovered later that he was innocent or that it was a wrongful conviction or that everything was rigged, uh, there's always going to be this question in the back of people's mind. And they're never going to believe anything he has to say. All right, so we're back to James Rowley. He's the head of the Secret Service. Um, in 64, as the Warren Commission is investigating, and they bring in James Rowley to testify. And he's been the head of the Secret Service. You look at the years there, 61 to 73. So that's all the years that matter with respect to the JFK assassination. He's right smack in the middle of that. He's in charge. And of course, he's a big buddy of LBJ. And they have the Warren Commission members have at the ready all this evidence of these security breakdowns that happened in Dallas. and about the party the night before at these nightclubs the agents were at, how they lost their credentials, lost their guns. They have plenty of ammunition to fire at James Raleigh, not to incriminate the Secret Service in the assassination of JFK necessarily, but to show terrible negligence on the part of the Secret Service, such that all of these agents should be punished some manner, shape, form. And of course, James Raleigh being the head of that agency is the one they're going to ask about it. So they ask if any of the agents implicated by the evidence they have, but also implicated by Bolden's accusations. Bolden has confirmed what many witnesses observed. And they have this testimony from the inside guy about this culture, this rotten culture within the Secret Service. They have testimony from Bolden about escapades, not just the one in Dallas, but Hyannisport. They have testimony about the Chicago plot. And to date, the Warren Commission, a lot of what happened in Chicago had been hidden from them, so as to prevent them from studying the fact that this might be the result of a pattern. You know, anyway, what Raleigh tells the Warren Commission is no, uh, they haven't been fired. None of them have been fired. In fact, all of them have been promoted. This is unbelievable. This is how you get people to play along in plots like this. This is why they replace the experienced guys with the inexperienced guys. There's a payoff. And the payoff is, as long as you keep quiet about what you know, what you did, when this is all over, you're going to get promoted. This is immunity. Ultravires at work here. We're going to do what's in our personal best interests. I'd like to get a promotion. I'd like to get better pay. Doesn't matter about public interest, right? I'm not going to consider public interest. It's all for what maximizes benefit to me or to my agency that I work for and represent, whichever. And afterwards, I will be immunized because James Raleigh, my boss, will go in front of the investigative body and clear my name and announce that I've been promoted. And a damn thing you can do about it. He told the Warren Commission, quote, "These men have suffered enough," as if they'd suffered at all. Fast forward to 2022, Abraham Bolden, for all these years, I believe he's still alive, was granted a full presidential pardon by Joe Biden. That was at the behest of Joe Biden's former boss, Barack Obama, which, incidentally, if you know where Barack Obama's from, politically, he's from Chicago. So he's very aware of this whole story. So the significance of this story is the fact that there was a Chicago plot. Many people denied for years that there was a Chicago plot. Abraham Bolden was able to confirm this testimony that not only was there suspicion of a Chicago plot, they actually arrested three men, two of the alleged shooters and released them, and one of the guys who turns out was going to be a patsy. And they just destroyed all the records so that it would just disappear. Since the trip never happened, is like the plot never happened. But Abraham Bolden is important because his testimony confirms that there was a plot and actions were taken and probably would have succeeded had not the White House canceled the trip. So that's a very important contribution that Abraham Bolden made to this, which of course the Secret Service didn't want him talking about. Then he also testified to the Warren Commission and was able to confirm a lot of their suspicions about negligence, at least negligence on the part of the Secret Service in Dallas. He was able to confirm that, up to and including the escapades where they'd stay out all night and party and leave the president under the protection of firemen. And it helped explain why there were all these Secret Service credentials floating around in Dallas that day, how that could have happened. When 10 of your agents lose their credentials at the cellar overnight in the bathroom, that means there's at least 10 credentials floating around in Dallas that shouldn't be, right? They got into the wrong people's hands. That's what happened. Now, the Warren Commission was very much determined to pin all this on Lee Harvey Oswald. So they weren't much interested in expanding the scope of the investigation into including Dallas or Chicago. But Abraham Bolden's testimony and the information he's provided subsequent to his book and interviews, etc., reveal that Chicago was essentially a dry run for Dallas. It has all the same earmarks. It had the same physical plan, a motorcade through the city, tall buildings, 90-degree turns. It had the same patsy configuration to substitute Thomas Arthur Valley for Lee Harvey Oswald. It had two of the same exact shooters, and I say shooters, but one of them was a spotter. David Morales and James Braden were literally arrested in Chicago, and James Braden was arrested in Dallas. And David Morales confessed later that he was in Dallas. They were if David Morales and James Braden were in Dallas, they were there together, just like they were in Chicago. Because one was the shooter, one was the spotter. That's how it worked. They were a team. It has the same kind of cover up. The teletype suppression. The FBI had a teletype warning in advance of Dallas that got suppressed, but not before people saw it. And then that was how the White House found out about the plot in Chicago. It started with an anonymous tip from somebody named Lee, came across to the FBI field office and went out on teletype form. Now that got suppressed later and destroyed, just like the Dallas teletype got destroyed. And so you have that cover up that is similar. You have the Bolden frame up, which is, here you have a witness who can expose criminal behavior on part of a complicity, at least on part of the Secret Service. How many people involved in the investigation of JFK in Dallas were framed for something to discredit their testimony? I mean, the list is long. He's lucky in a sense he wasn't killed. But as I said, he had too much light on him. A lot of these inconvenient witnesses end up dead in Dallas, but some of them had too much light on them, and they had to be discredited as a result. And I could be here for days talking about all those people. So it has all the same elements, and you see that Chicago was essentially a dry run for Dallas, and it it was sabotaged by a cleaning lady or worked at a rooming house, and by an anonymous tip from Lee that forced the White House to cancel the trip. And they thought it would all go away. They gave Thomas Arthur Valley a new identity, sent him out to Phoenix, Arizona. They released the two Cubans that they arrested, destroyed the records, and voila, it never happened. But because of Abraham Bolden, we do know that there was a Chicago plot, and that absent the White House canceling the trip, it probably would have succeeded, just like Dallas succeeded. Which is why in the following plots, they learned their lessons from what happened in Chicago. There was Lee tipped the FBI in Chicago, and that started the ball rolling to sabotaging the plot. Lee tried to go to the FBI and tip the FBI, left a note there, and the FBI later, after the assassination, destroyed the note. And there's only one reason you would destroy that note. If he came in and they tried to say he was threatening the FBI, well, if it was truly a threat, they would keep that and show that, because it would build a bigger case against Lee Harvey Oswald that he was their guy. It wouldn't paint him in a sympathetic light at all. My suspicion, I'm not alone in this, is that he was warning them that there was an assassination plot. And then when it succeeded, you can't allow that note to go public. So they destroyed it. So what they learned from Chicago was, don't let the tip from the FBI informant, Lee, destroy the plot in Dallas. Dispose of the evidence and do it quick. Um, and they learned about Secret Service agents who could later become problems. Uh, Abraham Bolden became a problem for the Secret Service going forward. So in Dallas, they made sure the problem, potential problem, Thomas Shipman was not uh, able to be a problem. They made Chuck Robertson disappear. So they're learning these lessons about what failed, what didn't work in Chicago, to how to make it work in Dallas. And I could go on and on about that, but the point is, this guy, this whistleblower, uh, paid a high price to tell his story. And I said this often. I am, having researched this as long as I have gotten to the point where when I'm trying to determine the credibility of a witness, I look at what happened to that person as a result of being said witness. Was he rewarded? Was there a payoff? Or was he punished? If he was punished, that removes for me a big chunk of human nature's motive for wanting attention or wanting to make things up and become important in your own eyes, or trying to enact revenge on somebody that you might not like. People, well, most people, when it comes down to it, push to shove, act in their own self-interest. And if they are willing to testify, knowing it's going to bring harm to them or to their families, that it's going to inconvenience them, that it's going to cost them money, that it's going to maybe cost them time in prison, cost them their reputation, whatever. And yet they do it anyway. That is a huge benefit, as far as I'm concerned, uh, benefit of the doubt that I give them. And I place a lot of credibility on what they say. It's almost universally true. People don't, just as a matter of reflex, do what's against their own self-interest. It's a conscious choice that they make to follow their principles. And I think Abraham Bolden qualifies as one of these kinds of witnesses, as do a lot of people that the research community or the lone nut community scoff at and say, "Oh, you know, Judith Ferry Baker, she's crazy. She's making stuff up." Look what happened to that woman, and continues to happen to her. I could go on and on about different witnesses who their lives have been ruined for doing the right thing. I put a lot more credence in what they say than any document that the government can produce, because look at who's producing those documents. It's the CIA, it's the FBI, it's the Secret Service, it's guys like Alan Dulles, it's guys like J. Edgar Hoover, it's guys like LBJ. These they have no benefit of the doubt with me, none of them. They can change, they can manufacture evidence like that. They are trained in disinformation, which means lying to the American people. They have control over the legal system. It is very easy for them to hide the wrong documents and release the right documents that, of course, exonerate them and blame other people. And they have all the motive in the world, and nothing bad ever happens to them. It's these other witnesses, the inconvenient ones, that become victims, sort of like uh, uh, collateral damage in the whole scenario. All right, that's the Abraham Bolden story. We're nearing the end of the Secret Service series, but I think we've got one or two more episodes to go. We'll get into those next week. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.